about this. I'm gonna come over here.
There we go. You gotta look at it on his screen. There you go.
There you go. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Thanks, everyone who's joining online. Thank you, Adobe, for hosting us. We really appreciate it. Adam and Aaron getting this set up. Thank you, Jason, for having us over here. And we're excited for today. Just quick announcements before we introduce our topic for today and our presenters. We are up on Measure Slack. For those of you who joined the group and we had a Slack group, that channel kind of died. And so we've got a new one up on Measure Slack called Intermountain West Augs. And so if you want to join that, and that could be a place where we can communicate as well. Any ideas for topics and presentations, just Slack me on Measure Slack, and then I can add you to that channel. So that's that. And for today, we're excited to meet and talk about how to migrate Adobe Analytics over to CJA, which, as we all know, most companies who are on analytics today, like everyone's heard of CJA, that's the future product, you know, for Adobe in terms of measuring digital analytics and beyond. And so for those of you who have looked into it, you also know that it is a process to be able to get from point A to B. And so today's presentation is all about the best practices to make that as smooth as possible and as fast as possible so that teams can lower that time to value and they can be taking advantage of CJA. And so I'd like to present our presenters for today. We have John Tomlinson, who is a master Adobe architect. Out of all the people that I know personally, no one has done more CJA implementations than John for the people that I know personally. And so we're lucky to have him here today to be able to help to present this topic. We also have Aaron Miller from the Adobe CSM team. Him and his team, these days, that's all that they're working on. That's a big part of what they're working on is CJA. And so he's going to share some thoughts from the Adobe perspective. And then we also have our young data Jedi, Ben Earl here, who's going to show us some of the tricks that, you know, Ben has a good skill set that spans data engineering, software engineering, and digital analytics. And so he's come up with some cool ideas on ways that we can do things faster instead of AEP. And he's going to show us some of those a little bit later on. And so without further ado, I'm going to pass this over to you, John, my friend. Thank you again for your time.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, we'll turn over to Aaron first and then I'll there.
Yeah, so thank you. Thank you, Sam. I appreciate it. So for the agenda today, we've done the general intros and overview. We'll get into decision strategy, talk about Adobe Analytics AEP Connector, migrating Adobe Analytics AppMeasurement to WebSDK/CJA, migrating Adobe Analytics on WebSDK to CJA, migrating reports and components, and migration automation ideas. So I'm going to start first with some of the challenges with migrating from Adobe Analytics to CJA. And just based on working with some of my clients and talking with some people, it seems as though some of the challenges would include a lack of internal resources. For example, who might run the project for the company? Another one might be a comfort level with Adobe Analytics. They've done all this work and spent all of this time on Adobe Analytics, and they've got a certain comfort level with that, which would include time and energy and history. There may be lack of services budget, and there may even be a lack of education. And then wanted to get into some of the benefits of migrating from Adobe Analytics to Customer Journey Analytics. And I've included 7 of these, and we'll go through those. The first one is comprehensive cross-channel analysis. So CJA allows you to analyze data from various channels, including web, mobile, call centers, CRM, and offline purchases. This provides a holistic view of the customer journey, unlike Adobe Analytics, which is more focused on web and mobile channels. Number 2, enhanced data stitching. CJA uses field-based stitching with first-party IDs like customer ID and email ID. This enables seamless integration of cross-channel data allowing for person-based analysis rather than just web and visit-based approaches. 3, unlimited variables and events. In CJA, the concepts of EVARs, props, and events are replaced with simple standardized key value pairs. This simplifies data definitions and eliminates the limitations on the number of variables and events you can track. Number 4, user-friendly data definitions. CJA leverages simple standardized key value pairs build experience platform, making data definitions more straightforward and reducing complexity. 5, customizable sessionization logic. CJA allows you to customize sessionization logic, define different session timeouts, and compare attribution across various session durations. And guys, that's the first time I said sessionization twice the right way in all of the times that I've practiced this. So thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. Number 6, historical data modification. With CJA, you can modify, with CJA, data analysts can modify historical data using data views. This feature allows you to change components, use strings as metrics, and correct or remove data retroactively without affecting the underlying data set. And then finally, number 7, enhanced personalization and engagement. By providing a comprehensive view of customer behaviors and preferences, CJA enhances personalization and improves customer engagement. Any questions for us on those benefits of migrating?
How much of the historical data modification do you see being done in the data views versus like down in the AEP layer and transforming it there?
Good question.
That's a great question. Most of the projects I've done, Sam, have been just in CJA interface itself, you know, with the modifications. But you and I talked about a scenario where that may be better to do AEP, like high volume, right? Very high volume could be a good example of where you want to join 2 data sets and then, you know, reprocess. So, yep.
Another one would be to secure, say, email, if you want to hash email before it gets up to the data view level so that it's secured away. And you didn't touch on security access to different fields, field level access, so that you can have different teams with different levels of access to the same data source.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up.
Good. Thanks, Aaron. All right, so we're going to switch screens here real quick. Give me a minute. You should see our screen. Is that showing up? There we go. Okay. Okay, cool. Thanks, Aaron. I think you covered that really well, the benefits. So to kind of sum up everything, what Aaron just mentioned, I really like hiking. So I want to share a hiking analogy. So traditionally with Adobe Analytics, the way I kind of think of this is you can only get so far down the path, right? Like it's really, it's a really good comprehensive view of web data, but there's so much more beyond. So like this picture here, the trail goes way beyond, and CJA kind of allows that because if you're pulling in more data sets, you're pulling in, offline data, CRM data, you're pulling in call center data, it gets you a bigger picture and literally journey of the whole view. So in my mind, that kind of sums up like all the benefits of CJA, just in a nutshell. Maybe the first thing I'd like to cover is with the source connector, which many of you are probably familiar with. There's going to be varying opinions on this with different consultants, different agencies are going to have different views on how this is used and how valuable it's going to be. Let's talk through pros and cons, and I'll just show you a quick flow of how this connector works. So you can see the top flow there. That's just a regular flow to Adobe Analytics. Then when you plug in the connector, which takes literally just a few minutes, it carbon copies and mutates the data from Adobe Analytics after it's been stored and puts it into AEP. So there's like a data set for profile, and there's a data set for event stuff that goes in a data set. So you basically, when you set this up, you have a carbon copy of Adobe Analytics available to you in AEP, and then of course CJA if you plug in into CJA. So pros and cons of this. So pros, let's talk through that. So again, very fast, easy connection. Takes a couple minutes. You just go into the source connector under AEP, and then you hit setup, and that walks you through a wizard, and the data starts flowing literally immediately. You have Adobe Analytics data in CJA. So the other cool thing is it also sets up auto schemas like it automatically. So they are legacy, and I'll talk about a con about that in a minute. But it is really neat that you don't have to go in there and take all this time to set up schemas and then map the fields manually. It's way easier to do it this way. The connector is really good, and this is my recommendation for historical data. If you use it moving forward, it'll technically work, but you're going to be paying for 2 licenses, right? One for Adobe Analytics, one for CJA. You don't want to pay for 2 licenses. So really great for historical data. If you, let's say you backfill a year's worth of data, or even up to the point in time when you switch to CJA, you have all that historical data from Adobe Analytics available to you in CJA. It's stored in a data set, so you have it available. And then you can switch over to CJA and have that view available, and then you can cancel your AA license. Some of the cons, though, paying for 2 licenses, I just mentioned that. Nobody really wants to do that, right? Adobe does, maybe, but not us, right? So the other con is it does use the legacy variables. So evars and props have been around for, I don't know, half of my life, 20 years, right? Since the 90s. And they still work, right? You can actually plug them right into the platform and map them and use them in CJA. Some people may want to do that. I recommend I know other agencies would probably recommend the same thing, where thinking forward with data modeling and AEP, using the more modern fields makes a lot of sense, because in the future, if you ever want to share, let's say, field groups across data sets, let's say you got like 5 data sets that you pulled into CJA, you're going to want to, use those modern fields. You're not going to want to share an evar across data sets. So that's one quick example. And plus, it just kind of makes things easier to plug in data in the future. So best practice here on the right, the checklist there. Use the connector for historical data. Migrate to WebSDK. And then after you've done that, you can then cancel your Adobe Analytics license, and you should have analytics, historical analytics data flowing in CJA. So so in a typical migration, so I'm going to be covering some examples in the tag manager, the data collection part. Aaron did a great job covering the benefits, kind of the business cases. I'm covering some of the technical cases at a high level because everybody's implementation is different. So I'm making some assumptions here that there's a data layer, there's you're using Adobe Launch. And I'll walk through step by step how to do a migration between rules sets and data elements. And after that, Ben and Sam will show some tools on how to make some of these steps a lot easier, how to automate some of it. So I'll just walk through these real fast. So data collection, the migration steps, we'll cover this in a few more slides too, but 3 basic steps, right? And there's going to be more involved here with depending on the framework. If you're on a single page application, if you're using different listeners, maybe you got Ajax listeners or timing. It all depends on several factors, but 3 basic steps is you're going to first build an AEP schema, which looks kind of like this. Here, this is one, and then you're going to build a data set, which stores the data, and then a data stream, which connects the data. So it kind of allows the flow from your WebSDK implementation to AEP, and then eventually the CJA. Then in Launch, you'll install the WebSDK extension, which I found really easy to use. There's obviously a manual way you can install it on, directly with the WebSDK, but you can also just use the tag manager. And if you're using Adobe Launch, this is very, very straightforward, very good way to do it. Then you'll update your rules to WebSDK format. And there's a few ways to do that. You can carbon copy your rules and then migrate them, or you could create brand new rules. And of course, again, that is going to depend on your implementation, how you have everything set up. So that's the data collection part. Now in the CJA user interface, again, this is very high level. Those of you who have already done CJA stuff, there's way more to it than 3 steps. There's all kinds of you got to select a primary identity and things like that. But these are kind of high level. So first thing you're going to do in the user interface is add a data view, kind of like very similar to an old Adobe Analytics report suite. Then you'll add the data set to the data view, the data set being the WebSDK data that's collecting from the web. And then you'll configure reporting components. And then the third step here in migration is to run the components migration wizard. And Adobe's done a really awesome job at this. I think it was Zach Hazeldine from product team. He's built this really cool tool that actually lets you move your Adobe Analytics projects, reporting projects, dashboards into CJA. And maybe some of you have seen that. It's actually kind of newer to me, so I thought it'd be worth bringing up. I would actually say there's a 4th step on here as a best practice: training and adoption, right? After you switch over to CJA, you're definitely going to want some training. That's a high level flow of what a typical migration will be like. I'll dive into the technical details a little bit more here. The top part is Adobe Analytics. The bottom part is CJA. I'm going to show, the most basic, simple example is going to be a page view with the page name. So we're gonna walk through how to migrate a page name to CJA. And then of course that's, that would be repeated with every other data point that you have on your website. So a typical flow, this is 101 Adobe Analytics, right? Looking at the top middle section here. When you collect analytics data historically, you capture it from the data layer. So page name will go into a data element, and then you're going to map that data element to an EVAR or prop or Adobe variable, and then you do the send event or send beacon. So I have a rule here. This is an old Adobe Analytics rule. This is the flow, right? Everybody's familiar with this. It's on DOM ready, we're going to set EVAR1 to page name, and then send the beacon. So that's how easy that rule is. And I realize, believe me, I realize it's way more complex than this on many projects, but I'm showing you this so that we can just get the basics of how this works. When you migrate to a WebSDK rule, the difference is going to be the very first thing you have to do is, again, create this schema in AEP so that it has a destination of where to go to. And you're going to set up a data element first. And the purpose of the data element is to give you an object that matches your schema. So this object here basically just pulls in my schema from AEP. There's all the fields, every single field there. Once you have that set up, then you can go into your rules. And the way I would do this is just carbon copy your old analytics rule and then modify it, because that way, it's triggering off the same event, if it's DOM ready or if it's page view, exactly how you've had it historically. But now you're just telling it to send in a different format to a different place, right? So in the WebSDK rule, it looks really similar, right? There's DOM ready, but you got two new actions here. The first one, the way I did this, and there is a couple ways to do it, but I'm recommending this approach, is you do an update variable. You select the WebSDK here. Then you're going to do update variable. And instead of EVARs, which they are actually buried in here because I added the legacy Adobe Analytics schema here. But since we're moving to CJA, we want to use the more modern field groups. So page name would actually go under web page details, and name, and there's page name. So it's mapped that way. And another important thing to know is when you when you're working with page views, you have to increment the page views value to 1. And what that does is it just tells, CJA is very agnostic, right? It doesn't know what a page view is unless you tell it what a page view is. So when you put the number 1 here, it's like a Boolean, and it says, okay, increment page view by 1. So every hit that comes through will then count as a page view in CJA. So I wish every implementation was this easy, but again, this is to show you how you can do this at a very basic level and then just repeat for all these other data elements. Okay, and then so the flow is very similar to Adobe Analytics. It's just know that there's those steps in between that need to change. And then the last part is here in the bottom right. Again, you're going to have to configure in CJA. I won't cover this part. There's plenty of docs out there that can show us how to do this, but you configure the data view, you add your data sets, and then you configure your reports components. So here's a quick screenshot again, just to review. So you add the new WebSDK rules, carbon copy them. That's how I recommend doing that. You could even copy an entire property if you want to work with the new launch property and just have all of your rules copied, and then you could just start modifying those and turn those into WebSDK rules. So then turn off the old Adobe Analytics rules, whether you switch a launch property to a new one, or whether you just cancel these rules here, just turn them off. And then you just want to validate like crazy so that you can make sure all the timing. So this is where a consultant comes in handy, because they can help with the timing. If you're doing like a single page app, if you're doing, again, more complex stuff, DOM scraping, for example, all that stuff will need to be closely validated and make sure it's working really well with the new WebSDK. One more important thing too, if you're switching, so I recently did a project for Adobe Analytics. People are still buying Adobe Analytics, and when they do now, we want to implement them on the WebSDK because that works with Adobe Analytics, right? So you can do those. I did one recently and it worked really well. In fact, I think it might have been actually easier than AppMeasurement. So it's definitely recommended to do that. If you're switching from a WebSDK implementation of Adobe Analytics, you want to, again, update to the more modern fields. So let's get rid of the old legacy fields there and just do the same thing I just walked through on the previous slides, which is, or in the demo there. Map, take out the EVAR, and then just put page name into the name, web.webpagedetails.name, and then page views increment to 1. So honestly, that is the full process. Again, with all those other factors to keep in mind, probably a good amount of work if you have a lot of, a big data layer, lots of data points, depending on how many, forms and buttons and everything that you're tracking. This could be pretty intense. So consulting is really helpful for that. This one is really cool. Has anybody here just in the room, has anybody heard of this component migration tool? Oh, wow. Okay. So I'm glad we're covering this. So the migration component tool, imagine that you have like 20 Adobe Analytics projects and having to rebuild all of those in CJA. I mean, that'll just take forever, weeks, maybe, I don't know. So this tool, built by Adobe, is actually right in the Adobe Analytics interface. If you just go right in the menu, under admin, right under data configuration and collection, it's right there hiding at the bottom. So you click that. I can't do a live demo because we don't have a sandbox that has both solutions enabled, but I can show you some screenshots. Basically, when you do this, select the wizard. It's going to ask you, first it'll migrate all your segments automatically. So all your segments will immediately get included in this migration, which is a huge time saver. Imagine trying to migrate or configuring your segments all over. I can't even imagine. What this wizard does then after while migrating the segments, is it allows you to auto map stuff from Adobe Analytics to CJA. So some of the stuff like the day dimension, for example, or hour or minute, those are very straightforward across solutions. So the wizard's like, okay, let's match up day in Adobe Analytics to day in CJA. And then same with the visits and the sessions metric, the wizard will map those together because it knows session would be equivalent to a visit. Then there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff that won't be auto migrated, so you have to manually select these. So in this, let's see if I can zoom in a little. So in this example here, you are going to have some stuff like card events. CJA definitely won't recognize those because it, you know, again, it's agnostic. So you're going to have to go in and select like checkouts, cart removals, bounces, and then map them manually to CJA fields. And believe me, this is a huge time saver. So I think this is a really cool win for Adobe releasing this. If we share the slides, the links are here, so you can walk through that. I would just recommend going through the prereqs for sure, because there's some gotchas with it as well. Just so you're aware of what happens and you know what's available, that kind of thing. So the other thing too that I heard, Zach told me that they are this next quarter. I don't know if that means like for Adobe, I don't know if that means September, like Q for, I don't know, the quarters are different at Adobe. So he said Q4, so
It's coming up.
September starts Q4. So it's gonna be September, October, November, I think. Some new features will be released with this, which will allow you to bulk migrate. So in other words, if you have like 100 dashboards, supposedly you should be able to go in once this feature is released, the enhancements released, you should be able to bulk migrate all those projects. And he mentioned something, I didn't hear the details, so this is kind of a sneak peek, but it's like, it also migrates, it's going to improve some of that mapping process with the fields and things like that. So that's really exciting. So that'll save a lot of people a lot of time. Okay, that's it for the technical flow. Are there any questions? I kind of went through that without any Q&A. We're going to be doing Q&A at the very end too, but is there any questions I can answer right now too? Okay. All right, we'll turn over to Ben. He's got some exciting stuff that automates some of these steps I showed you. And remember this, what I showed you is very manual, right? So there's some tools out there that can make this a lot easier. So now that you know how to do it the hard way, we'll look at the easier way.
So yeah, I've been working with Sam. We've been going through and like interviewing a bunch of people to see like what some rough spots are in like doing this migration and trying to figure out what are some good solutions that we can propose here to like help remove the friction for moving from Adobe Analytics to CJA. And so there's really two parts of this migration. One part is migrating from AppMeasurement to WebSDK, and the other part is migrating from the actual Adobe Analytics reporting suites into the CJA reporting suites or whatever, right? So for this first project, it's going to be focusing on that first step, right, of moving from AppMeasurement to WebSDK. And we've noticed a lot of people get frustrated with this one step because you kind of have to change how you're thinking about it. Instead of thinking about a flat list of evars and props and stuff like that, now you're jumping over into like this deeply nested list of fields. And you also have to set up these schemas, and it has a lot more constraints, and you can't just send anything. You have to like specify it's going to be a string, or you could specify it's a list of, it has to be one of these values or whatever, right? Like there's a lot more constraints. It's a lot more, it's a lot more secure, maybe is the I can't think of the right word, but there's a lot more detail and there's a lot more configuration that needs to be done. And even just within the Web SDK, you can like set up like sub schemas and you can update the variables. And there's just like a lot of different ways in order to set up the Web SDK even within the launch extensions of like how to configure those, how to update the variables. And it can be a little confusing if you don't like have someone to walk you through like best practices of like, okay, ignore all of these steps, ignore all of this stuff, just do it like this or whatever, right? Like if you don't have those instructions, it can get really confusing really fast. So there's a steep learning curve. You're also jumping back and forth into AEP a lot from the web app extensions. If you're going over, you're like, oh, I forgot to add this field, so I have to jump over, add another field. Jump back over, okay, add that to the other schemas or whatever, right? So you have to keep these matched up in the two different platforms. You have to define the schemas, manage all these XDM objects if there's any changes, manage all the security requirements of the fields and stuff like that. And so thinking about this problem some more, it shouldn't really be that much of a change between AppMeasurement and WebSDK if you're using a data layer. Now, I think it's pretty well established that using a data layer is a great practice, whether you're using Adobe Analytics or AppMeasurement or WebSDK, right? Because the data layer is this one JavaScript object on the page where all of your data is going through. So all of your events, you just add another object to this array of data, and you're just kind of keeping track of everything in one place. And so everything that's pushing data goes into the data layer. Anything that's querying data asks it from the data layer, right? So it's this one place, and you don't have to go through, because in your at Adobe Analytics project, you have maybe, let's say, hundreds of tags or whatever, right? That you're tracking every single thing. And so if you want to know, like, hey, what's everything that sets this one field or whatever, right? You're going to have to go through, and there's no easy way to go through which tags set which fields and stuff like that, right? But if you're using a data layer, it's a lot more concise, like bring it all together. Let's put everything in one spot, right? Okay, so you have a data layer. If you're using AppMeasurement currently, you're mapping from the data layer to AppMeasurement fields, right? So my event page load gets translated to event 15. My page.name in my data layer gets mapped to evar4. Title of the page gets mapped to page name, etc. Right? If you're doing WebSDK, very similar story. It's just deeply nested, right? So we set up the schema. My company is called Burminx, whatever. But I set up this a custom schema, and that's how it's a custom schema because it starts with this double underscore and stuff like that. So now I'm mapping my event to my custom event, and then down here I'm using the default Adobe fields of the web interaction, page details, whatever, right? So I can map these to there, right? Okay. So these are very similar. How can we optimize this? How can we make it so that it has a single interface to do all the things and configure everything in one interface? Well, this is sounding a lot like the data stream mapping that Adobe has. So if you're familiar with the data stream mapping, you're mapping your source fields to your target fields, right? So you're typing in the paths, you're putting them in the others. So I'm thinking that we have something like this, but it runs in the browser. And it also differentiates between different events. So every single time you push data to a data layer, you're creating a new event. And so we can make this sort of mapping event based. So depending on which event is firing, we map different fields over. And that's not that. Okay, let's go over here. So here's my little prototype that I threw together. This would probably live as an Adobe extension or something where you're configuring your mappings and stuff like that. But here's a basic overview of what it might look like. So we'd have some sort of global section where it says, hey, just for all of the events, I want you to take the page.topic off of my data layer, and I want you to put it inside of the web.webpagedetails.site section path inside the Adobe schema. Here's our custom schema fields. And then specifically during the click event, I want you to put a hard-coded button click name into the web interaction type, whatever, right? Okay, so I push this. When I click this button, it adds another object to my data layer, firing that event. So now I have two objects inside my data layer. And now we can see that it sent a mock event to Alloy, which is the name of Adobe Web SDK, right? And so we can see that it translated this data layer to these events or these fields. And it's doing this mapping based on this configuration over here. So I could update this over here and say, hello world. And I could say my new path, save this. And if the demo gods are helping me, if I refresh this and push this, then it says my new path got set to hello world. So yeah, so it'd be like you can configure all of your events and stuff inside of me. And this kind of just like circumvents the entire WebSDK launch extension sort of thing. This is basically doing the job of the extension, and you're configuring it all based on your data layer. So that's one idea for how we can improve the sort process of making it better. Another.
Could I add a note to that real quick? So yeah, this is really cool. I think this is such a huge time saver, because otherwise you would, I mean, that bypass is right there. It sends it directly from Alloy or to Alloy. Or sends an Alloy object. So it bypasses, as Ben said, the WebSDK extension. So there's definitely pros and cons to that, right? One of the pros is that you don't have to go in and set up all these data elements and figure out how they all map to your data layer and then manually add them to all those fields. This, in a click of a button, basically just translates your whole data layer, puts it into an object, and you're done. So huge time saver, right? If you're looking for a rapid deploy, I would totally go with something like this. You know, and it kind of depends on your use cases, how complex your data layer is, but it's really cool.
Okay, so this solves the sort of problem of like the trying to troubleshoot and trying to figure out the best way to implement WebSDK. The next step is trying to manage all of the fields inside of AAP, right? So because we have to set up those schemas and stuff. And so there is an API for it. And so we were thinking this is kind of just like an alternative, or just showing that we can do it. If I just wanted purely to take what's exactly inside my data layer and just turn that into a schema and generate that schema inside of AAP. So then I don't have to go into AAP and generate this. So this is a little demo I recorded in April or something. What's the third month of the year? January, February, March. Thank you. This is a little demo. So right here is the data layer. I'm using the ACDL right here on the demo website. So this is what the ACDL looks like. So they have some error data. And I made this little bookmark up here that I'm clicking called the copy data layer. So I'm just going through, I'm seeing what gets pushed into the Adobe data layer as I'm going through the website. And every single time I push the copy data layer, it's copying everything that's inside of the data layer. And here you can see, here's everything that I copied out. We got a handful of data over there. And so here's my little demo website. I can paste that into here. And this can automatically figure out the schema of the data that you pasted into there. So we can see that all right here. We got page data, page name. Those are all streams. So some basic configuration, the basic things that you need to set up the schema inside of Adobe or AP. And so based on the sample data that we saw, let's generate a schema. So this is just using the AP API. Generates the schema, generates the field group, generates the data set, also generates the data stream and the data stream mapping. It's a lot of steps. It's a lot of steps to create stuff in AP, but we can just show you that we can do that automatically with an API. So here's the schema that automatically generated with those events or with this data. I'll generate it inside of a custom theme, which means that we had to go and generate a custom field group in order to put that inside the schema. And I go over here, and here's my data stream that automatically generated. So this data stream is mapping to the data set that I generated, and it also is mapping all of these, or it made a separate mapping field for every single one of these, so you can go in and edit this stuff. But yeah, so that's just showing that we can do this, and maybe this would be part of that other tool that I showed you, where you say, hey, I actually want to create a new field, and then it would automatically go create a new field inside your field group or something like that. Just to make and it's not just about like time, it's not just about managing or making it faster to do the migration, but it's also trying to keep in mind like all of the future work that you're going to have to do to like upkeep. And if you can just like make it better, make tools that make it easier to manage all of the data transformation in the future, then that's going to save you from headaches in the future and stuff like that. So I think developing these tools is worth it. And yeah, I think I'd turn it over to Sam now for the last tool.
So let me show mine first before you showed all that.
Sorry.
Let me share my screen. Let's see. Okay. So this tool, like after listening to your presentation, John, I don't know how much this actually applies because like what you showed is that you can just copy and paste your rules. And they already have the data elements, which, you know, those data elements are pointed to your data layer. So this shortcut that I made, I guess if you're doing the CJA migration and you're standing up a new website and you have no data elements for your data layer, that's really what this is for. I had a friend approach me. He just got done with back-to-back standing up new websites. And he's like, can you write something that can just automatically create data elements for everything in my data layer? And I said, yeah, we can write something. So that's what this is here. You can see here, I've got an empty launch property, data collection property. And if I have my data layer, we'll just use this for an example. And we've got page, and then inside of this object, we've got page name, and we've got all these different different data points, these different keys. And so what if we wanted to go through, like, what if this was 100, what if this data layer was huge and there's like 100 different keys or 200 or 300 different keys? That's really tedious inside a data collection to go through and manually create each of those data elements and point them, to this part of your data layer. So I wrote this data elemental. This is a Python script, which is pretty easy to set up. And what it'll do is once you drop your credentials in to Adobe, then you can run this, and this will list out all of the different data collection properties you have access to. You can see this number 11. That's the property right there that we're trying to create these new data elements for. And then it'll read our data layer from this file, and it says, okay, here are all of the available keys. You got the event, page, all of these that we saw back here. And so if we wanted to exclude any, we can exclude here. We'll just keep all of them though and type done. And then it goes through and creates these new data elements for you. So if we come back here and refresh the page, you can see they're all here. And these are all ACDL data elements. That's, I guess, prerequisite. You have to be using this extension, but you can see the path right there, and it's pointed, exactly to how it is here in your data layer. So that's this little tool. If anyone's interested in using this, like I said, it's not necessarily, it might not be a CJA migration, but if you're standing up a new website at the same time as migrating to CJA, then I think this can help you quite a bit. So, and that's that.
Yeah, and there may be times too when you would want to update your data layer at the same time, add new data elements during a migration. So yeah, that could come in handy. That's awesome. That's it. That's what we had for today. We're happy to answer any questions, talk about whatever you guys want. Yeah, Jeff. Hey.
So a question for Ben, and maybe we'll come back, Sam. The tools you were showing there show a lot of promise for what problems I'm facing, where we have a lot of different tools to connect to. Not all of them have native connectors to AEP. So we're routing through our data lake and processing there, where we're in Databricks and we can do lots of SQL magic. But it would be much simpler if I could just take table structures or ERD diagrams and say, make these into schemas for me, and I'm just going to do a straight data feed. So would your tool be adaptive in that way, where you could
That'd probably be something separate, but
Because you're taking a JSON structure, right, for your data.
taking JSON structure, but very similar process of like, okay, let's turn it into a JSON schema, let's turn it into XDM schema, and let's go generate it and do all the grunge work to actually make it work and set the data set. But yeah, that's something that could happen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because one of the challenges we have is in the GUI, it's been really slow to be setting all this up and then going back and then working on the data feed and then saying, maybe we do want this field, let's go add it. You know, it'd be nice to just say, just take all this and then we'll strip out the pieces we don't want and keep going.
Yeah. I mean, with Databricks, you could, I mean, it's not this, but it's something that we could write where you just go into Databricks.
Yeah.
You pull down all the tables and the fields like relational database style.
Yeah.
You know, tables, fields, and then we can map that over to the XDM schema and have that automated. So definitely doable.
They said they were working on a Databricks connector for AEP. They told us a few quarters out to look for it. So we're like, we have lots of data now.
Well,
Ben
One
could
thing-
put that together in a weekend instead of playing Elden Ring. He could just.
One thing I would call out for some of like this type of like automated ingestion is I don't want to overlook the importance of field groups. And John talked about this earlier, which is if you want to blend this data and actually be able to merge it into kind of one journey or one kind of set of experiences, you really have to prioritize field groups and the design. It's a lot like relational databases. Is you got to make sure that these field groups align with each other, because if you just import a dump of all of your columns, they're not going to necessarily line up when you start to actually analyze them in CJA. So just keeping that in mind, that we'll have to plan a little bit for like a modular approach to this.
Well, and that's where I think an ERD could be handy, because you have all the nested relationships already. And if they're field groups, inheriting field groups, you could replicate that structure pretty quickly. And it's already described in a way that's scalable. So you know, it was more than just trying to reinvent it by looking at table structures and trying to determine what was inherited and what's a many to one and how am I going to handle that. I was hoping for something a little more native. So.
Yeah, I'd love if AEP had some type of like ER diagram type thing that can actually represent how field groups interact with each other. That would be nice.
Yes. Feature enhancement.
Yeah.
You know, that's a great point. I mean, from a BI perspective, as long as you have the primary keys and the foreign keys, that's the main thing. As long as you know how the data is supposed to be combined, and most of the time, that's where the data engineers and the BI team, they can know, okay, this is the granularity of this data set. It's supposed to join, there's one customer has many orders, right? And so they'll know that when building these out inside of AEP. But if you got the primary keys and the foreign keys, that's the first thing I look for.
Yep.
Any other questions?
This is a little maybe tangential to migrating from AA to CJA, but it does come to speak to this concept of, I guess, abstraction that's happening with CJA, in the sense that whereas before AA was very much kind of self-contained in a box from implementation all the way through reporting, you can obviously see that's going away with the CJA paradigm. And that's honestly one of the biggest lessons that we've been learning in this migration process, is the amount of additional coordination that needs to happen internally with our data engineering team and other project management is always more than you expect. And I think because you're coming from a paradigm where like, hey, Adobe Analytics marketing wants this, marketing, the rest of the company doesn't have to worry about it as much because it's so self-contained. But in this future state where we are asking to connect to more data and potentially trying to play along more best practices, that does require a higher level of collaboration and coordination. This is very lengthy preamble just to say, how have you seen cases with WebSDK being abstracted in such a way that it can feed into more than just AEP and things like that? Where do you anticipate that being like one of those intended use cases, or is that trying to fit a square peg in a round hole?
Are you talking about WebSDK and other systems?
Yeah, yeah.
Besides,
For
You've got-
example, let's say we have CJA and a CDP called Helium or some other CDP out there, right? Is there, like, hey, there's a lot of good stuff happening with this Web SDK development.
Yeah.
Can we take advantage of that simultaneously to push both into AEP and potentially other platforms that could benefit from it too? And have you seen that happening?
Interesting. I personally haven't, but makes sense. That makes sense. Like, APIs, there's APIs where you should be able to do that. And, I think it would depend on Telium too, like if they're able to ingest in that format, but that's a really interesting point. Yeah.
I'm just
Sounds
thinking-
like a newer area.
Yeah.
If we're putting all this work into creating a nice schema and things like that, it'd
Yeah.
be great to leverage it
Yeah,
in
make
lots
it
of different,
more
agnostic,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, for all solutions, yeah.
Eric, there's one group that we're talking to, and it's not Telium, so it's not front end, but they need everything pushed into BigQuery as well, Google Cloud. And so at the data stream though, we could just set up another data stream that pushes in. You got your AEP stream,
Right.
and we can also do one to GCP, and just make sure that it lands at the right table and it's mapped correctly. But I don't know if that's what you're thinking, but that's something that we're
Yeah.
talking
Yeah,
about. Like, hey, we're
that's
already
like-
collecting it. Like, why not just, store it in a couple different places where it's needed?
Right. What are you
It's
gonna
like
say,
the
Jake?
event forwarding capability. It's an additional
Yeah.
SKU, the RTCDP connections. Yeah.
Or I was gonna say event forwarding, I think that even happens at the
Yeah.
platform, at the edge, data platform.
It's actually at the edge, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does all the translation there and then forwards the
Yeah, that would be an obvious way to do it,
format.
right? So, okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's an add-on, just so you know.
Yeah, yeah. Always,
So,
always, yeah.
it's an add-on.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, any other questions or any other thoughts? I mean, the purpose of this, we've got 3 minutes left, was, talk about faster ways. Any other thoughts or questions for John, or any other thoughts on this subject, migrating faster from AA to CJA? And then we can wrap it up if not.
If you have any questions offline, feel free to reach out.
All right, round of applause. Thank you so much, John. Okay, until next time, we'll have the recording sent out to everybody, and thank you for joining online as well. Goodbye.
You planning to share the slides, or do you want to pull those two links and put them in the chat?